The sight of dozens of military aircraft taxiing before takeoff is remarkably uncommon during peacetime operations. On April 16, 2012, a contingent of 70 American F-15 Strike Eagles of the 4th Fighter Wing prepared to take off at the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. The few people that witnessed the impressive aircraft formation feared that a sudden air conflict was brewing between the United States and an enemy nation. Fortunately, the sleek-looking predators of the sky were performing an elephant walk to commemorate brave Americans who had already fought in such a conflict. The term elephant walk dates back to the Allied bombing raids over German-controlled territory during World War II. Large fleets of American and British bombers, such as B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-25 gunships, steadily conducted bombing raid missions over Germany that surpassed 1,000 aircraft. As the war progressed, it became extremely difficult for the Germans to hold back the hundreds of aircraft that dropped tens of thousands of bombs in various German cities at a time. According to aviators and onlookers who witnessed such an amount of aircraft at runways, the taxiing of heavy bombers before takeoff in single-line nose-to-tail formations looked like elephants walking towards a watering hole. The term has since been incorporated into the U.S. Air Force lexicon when referring to a maximum sortie surge. An elephant walk is commonly used when preparing squadrons for wartime operations and when training airmen for single mass objectives in which all aircraft within the unit will participate. This type of formation involves a lot of coordination and teamwork. Elephant walks are also effectively used as a show of force, just like the perfectly aligned infantry formations during military parades. A well-known elephant walk was organized by the US and South Korea at the Kunsan Air Base on April 6, 2012. The affair was meant to send the supreme leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, a retaliatory message due to his country's failed ballistic missile tests. The 70 F-15E Strike Eagles of the 4th Fighter Wing that gathered on April 16th at Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina had a more cheerful objective in mind. The event sought to commemorate the sacrifice of the pilots of the 4th Fighter Wing that took down more than 1,000 Luftwaffe aircraft in World War II. On April 16, 1945, during the last days of the war in the European front, the 4th Fighter Group destroyed approximately 105 enemy aircraft as part of a massive bombing mission. As such, the unit reached a tally of more than 1,000 downed warplanes, the highest number of any group in U.S. Air Force history. The 4th Fighter Group was responsible for eradicating Luftwaffe resistance over France after the Normandy invasion of June 6, 1944. It also withheld continuous setbacks from enemy attacks as ground forces approached the German mainland. The triumph of the 4th is mainly associated with U.S. Army Air Corps Colonel Donald Blakesley, who decided to modify some P-51 Mustangs so they could travel the same distances as the lethal Luftwaffe Messerschmitt 109s, which had excellent range and significant fuel storage. The 4th Fighter Wing, with aircrews from several fighter squadrons, would fly across the country in a turkey shoot training mission and generate about 70 sorties to take down 1,000 targets on bombing ranges across North Carolina. Turkey shooting is another term that goes back to World War II. It is said that during a ferocious encounter with Japanese aircraft in the Pacific Theater on June 19, 1944, a U.S. Navy carrier downed 373 Japanese warplanes while only losing 23 American aircraft. After the battle ended, a Navy pilot said that it was, quote, like a turkey shoot. In the Pacific, air power became essential for isolating Japanese forces, firmly dug in a dozen islands as the Americans invaded them before moving forward until they made their way into Japan. The footage from the 2012 celebration shows the American F-15 Strike Eagles taxiing on the runway in perfect formation. In the words of Colonel Patrick Doherty, commander of the 4th Fighter Wing, quote, "This F-15E strike package and turkey shoot honored the excellence and sacrifices of our wing's past while flexing 4th Fighter Wing air power today, sharpening our warfighting spirit and skills as we look toward the future." In doing so, quote, "We proudly carry on the legacy of the 4th FG's victories, as well as those of the Wing's Korean, Vietnam, and Gulf War efforts, and believe it is critically important that current and future generations of airmen understand and celebrate our history, so they can visualize what they will be capable of doing in the future." In August 1960, a U.S. Navy pilot took off from Naples, Italy, and climbed to about 5,000 feet. It was a routine operation, nothing unusual for the day. When he leveled off, he found he needed an unusual amount of pressure on the stick. It was strange. The F-8 Crusader he was controlling felt a lot heavier than expected. It was also unresponsive. Something was definitely off. At first, he cursed the crew and maintenance. They'd surely missed something. Looking around for the cause, he analyzed the control panel. Maybe a switch was off, but everything seemed okay. That was until he glanced outside the cockpit window. For a second, his entire body felt a shock that ran down his spine. He was flying with the Crusader's wings folded up. Keeping his head cool, he managed to dump fuel to make the aircraft lighter. After 20 minutes of dangerous flying, the pilot made it back to base unharmed. When the engineers at Vought heard the story, they were both pleased and perplexed to hear that their aircraft could fly with the wings folded. To save space aboard decks of U.S. carriers, aircraft production companies began building special planes designed for carrier operations. Most had configurations that let their wings be folded up and out of the way. This change was made to make room and save space for additional assets on the ship. If more aircraft could be loaded for combat operations, a carrier's fighting and defensive capabilities could be increased. Such was the case of legendary American fighters such as the F-4 Phantom, F-8 Crusader, and F-14 Tomcat, all veteran aircraft from the Cold War era. However, before taking off for the skies, pilots had to ensure that their wings were unfolded before reaching the skies, as they could not do so mid-flight. To take off with the wings not fully extended was perilous. The pilot's safety and the entire aircraft could be compromised. The plane could stall, fall abruptly, and damage the carrier. Or even worse, if carrying an explosive payload, they could sink their own ship. Yet more than a dozen times, F-8 Crusader fighters took off with their wings unfolded. Most of the occasions when this happened were at night, when visibility is significantly limited before and during flight. Thankfully, they all were able to land successfully, out of harm's way, thanks to the Crusader's strength and excellent engineering design. One folded wing incident happened on January 22, 1968, when pilots of the Navy Fighter Squadron VF-53 were preparing for a deployment to Vietnam aboard the USS Bonhomme Richard. As a final part of the pre-flight regimen, all pilots were briefed to fly field mirror landing practice, known as FMLPs or bounces. In the exercise, they would fly to about 2,100 feet before landing and taking off without stopping. After a discussion with the officer of the day, one of the pilots was ordered to perform the 5 FMLPs again. Urged to finish the additional practice quickly, the pilot raced his aircraft directly to the takeoff area without completing all of his checks. In the surrounding darkness, he could not see a thing. As the Crusader began flying, he tried to locate the takeoff checklist as the plane buffeted in the sky. The absence of light due to a malfunction prevented him from reviewing his flight manual to diagnose the problem. After several maneuvers, the pilot began losing control of the aircraft. He radioed tower control, quote, "Miramar Tower, this is NJ-207. I have some serious control problems. I may have to get out." The reply from tower puzzled him when he heard, quote, "Roger. NJ-207, your wings are still folded." The pilot glanced outside the Crusader to see the wingtip position lights sticking straight up into the air. They must have folded during the takeoff roll. In his desperation, the pilot remembered a flying safety article describing another pilot's similar error. This pilot, like him, had taken off with the wings folded. The article's bottom line was not to mess with the wings. It also explicitly warned not to try to fold them down during flight. After obeying Tower's instructions meticulously, he made it back to safety, landing with no significant problems on the runway. He flew the Crusader with the wings folded for 7 uninterrupted minutes. The only damage was that the wing fold was bent and the wing fold mechanism was broken. The F-4 and F-8 had their fair share of taking off with their wings folded. The future F-14 prototype was created intentionally with a configuration that could let it fly with the aft forward swept wing at up to 60 degrees. These trials were conducted after 4 fleet aircraft found themselves in the same challenging situation. During a joint training exercise between Russian and Japanese forces in May of 2006, a Russian Mi-14 helicopter was performing amphibious maneuvers off the coast of the island of Sakhalin when disaster struck. Footage taken on the scene shows how the helicopter repeatedly fails to take off from the ocean. Seconds later, its nose tips forward and its rotor blades clip the water, followed by the helicopter breaking up into small parts. In the chaos that ensued, the rescue forces had to act quickly to retrieve the 13 passengers aboard the sinking helicopter. In the early 1960s, the development of submarines with nuclear capabilities was already underway, and both the Soviet Union and the United States were building a fleet of stealth hunters to wreak havoc in the case of imminent conflict. The development of nuclear submarines was directly related to the doctrine of MAD, or mutually assured destruction. This military strategy doctrine studied the possibilities of how to wage a full-scale nuclear war between the world's superpowers. Then, during the Vietnam War and the increasing tensions of the Cold War, the military industry became overwhelmed once again with more nuclear developments. In addition, U.S. Navy submarines kept patrolling the waters off the coasts of Vietnam, Korea, Japan, and beyond, looking for enemy activity. Soviet Navy submarines did the same thing, and from time to time, they even spotted each other. Still, the Soviet Navy got anxious about U.S. submarines getting so close to Russian waters, and put its small number of modified Mil Mi-4 Hound helicopters to good use in order to spot them. Then, in April of 1965, the Soviet Communist Party Central Committee and Council of Ministers issued a request to develop a short-range, shore-based anti-submarine helicopter that could replace the aging Mil Mi-4. It was just the beginning for the Mil Mi-14 Haze, the Soviet Navy's most potent anti-submarine hunter. The Mil Mi-4 Hound helicopter was designed in response to the American Sikorsky H-19 Chickasaw used during the Korean War. It was introduced in 1953 and physically resembled its American counterpart. However, it could lift more weight and carry more payload. From the more than a dozen variants produced, the Mi-4VM, or VM-12, was used as an anti-submarine warfare helicopter alongside the 4M Hound B and Hound C types. These helicopters featured a Coors M SPRS-1 radar station, an additional fuel tank, a rescue boat, and an under-fuselage gun turret. Over 4,000 Mil Mi-4s were produced before the Soviet Air Forces began phasing it out in favor of the Mil Mi-8. The Mi-8 twin-turbine helicopter was initially intended as a transport helicopter for military and civilian usage, but it was quickly discovered that it could excel at other roles. Its base design was inspired by its predecessor, but it also borrowed from the American Sikorsky H-34 Choctaw. In 1959, while aerospace engineer Mikhail Mil was developing the Mi-8, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev visited the United States and flew aboard the presidential S-58 helicopter, which was a modified H-34. Khrushchev was deeply impressed by the helicopter and ordered a Soviet version with similar capabilities and commodities. With enough funding, Mil eventually produced 5 prototypes with different engines and avionics. The mass production model first flew in 1964 and was approved by the Soviet government, and the first helicopters were delivered the following year. At first, the Soviet armed forces were not interested in the Mi-8. It wasn't until the full swing of the Vietnam War that the Army turned to the Soviet helicopter. The wide use of the American Bell UH-1 or Huey helicopter changed the Soviet perspective, and in 1967, the Soviet Air Force introduced the Mi-8T variant that carried up to 24 men. It was also armed with rockets, anti-tank guided missiles, and other ordnance, depending on the mission. The helicopter that would become the Mil Mi-14 was a modified maritime conversion of the company's Mi-8T. It kept many of the critical features of its predecessor, except that it was especially suited for submarine hunting and amphibious assaults. The most significant difference between the Mi-8T and the Mi-14 was that it featured a boat-like hull that resembled the Sikorsky Sea King. This allowed the helicopter to land and take off from the water during amphibious operations. Additionally, the Mi-14's 4-point undercarriage was fully retractable, as its wheels retracted into large sponsons located on the rear of the fuselage. In addition, the search radar was housed beneath the nose, and the helicopter could carry 1 torpedo, naval mines, and up to 8 depth charges housed in a watertight weapons bay fitted near the fuselage center. The Mi-14 also carried a towed magnetic anomaly detector, or MAD device, that further enhanced the aircraft's anti-submarine role. Its maximum registered speed was 230 kilometers per hour, with an estimated range of 1,135 kilometers and an approximate service ceiling of 3,500 meters. The Mi-14 was manned by a crew of 4 men, and it had plenty of space for up to 24 passengers. The helicopter's first test flights took place in 1969, before it went into production. From then on, it became Russia's primary shore-based helicopter and has also been shipped to countries like North Korea, Poland, Romania, Libya, Germany, and Syria. Numerous variants have been developed throughout the decades, including the PLM variant that features a dipping sonar and digital computer, and the 14BT that is equipped for mine-towing countermeasures. Meanwhile, other versions were converted to 24-passenger vehicles and search and rescue variants with searchlights and sliding doors. Many of these Mi-14 helicopters are currently serving in the Black Sea and northern fleets of the Russian Navy. On May 12, 2006, Russian and Japanese forces were conducting a joint search and rescue exercise near Hokkaido Island in Japan. Both navies were training amphibious crashes or landings over the sea with Meal Mi-14 helicopters. Footage from the last exercises shows the Mi-14 performing some amphibious takeoffs and landings, while a Navy vessel and several boats can also be seen in the background. The Mi-14 is seen hovering over the water, while the ocean's current appears to tilt it forward and backward. Then, all of a sudden, it seems as if the pilot loses control, and the helicopter leans forward into the water. Moments later, the tips of the rotors hit the water, and the helicopter turns into pieces. A big splash of water suddenly covers what looks like the rotors cutting the tail fin, and then it crumbles to the right. The helicopter's fuselage then goes into a violent alligator roll and begins to go down into the water, barely staying afloat. The Mi-14 was carrying 13 passengers, and they were all rescued by nearby boats. Only 3 people were severely injured and taken to a hospital in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk. Unfortunately, the pilot later lost his life due to the injuries, probably as a result of the angular momentum that was transferred to the vehicle in a fraction of a second. Hours later, Flight International reported, quote, "An investigation has begun into the cause of a crash into the Sea of Japan by a Russian Meal Mi-14 Haze during an emergency simulation exercise." The note clarified that one of the helicopter's engines failed, and the pilot did everything he could to regain control and stabilize the aircraft. However, nothing could be done. Later that day, the half-submerged helicopter was towed to the port of Korsakov. On November 17, 2021, the British carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth was carrying out routine operations in the Mediterranean when one of her F-35B Lightnings failed to take off and plummeted into the depths of the ocean. The Ministry of Defense did not provide any additional information at the time, citing an ongoing investigation. However, over a week later, a surveillance video that appeared to come from one of the carrier's security cameras was leaked to the internet. The impressive footage shows the carrier slowing down as it moves along the takeoff ramp, only to plummet right as the pilot ejects. The video instantly raised alarms, especially as the high-tech piece's cost is almost £100 million and could contain delicate information for potential adversaries to find. More importantly, it raised serious concerns about what led to the accident. Key partnerships and alliances have helped the Royal Navy and Air Force secure their authority over the world's seas, and modern technologies have undoubtedly provided an invaluable edge into the new millennium. When Lockheed Martin created the 5th-generation stealth fighter, the F-35 Lightning II, in the early years of the 21st century, the opportunity to bulk up their strength was not to be missed. Consequently, the F-35B variant of the American multi-role STOL combat aircraft found its way into the British defenses. The United Kingdom's most advanced and expensive jets, at almost £100 million each, combine radar-evading stealth technology with supersonic speeds, and the Lightning II is projected to become the nation's primary strike aircraft for the next 3 decades. There are plans to acquire 138 examples, which would place the nation as one of the top 3 largest operators of the jet, right behind the US and Japan. In 2019, the British F-35s first saw combat against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, reporting from a Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. After that, and in possession of the most advanced warplanes in the air, the UK set out to conform, quote, the largest air group of 5th-generation fighters at sea anywhere in the world. Thus was born the Carrier Strike Group 21. The carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth operates 10 US Marine Corps F-35s in tandem with 8 British stealth jets. Moreover, the strike group welcomes the support of American and Dutch warships. When the group first sailed in the fall of 2020, the UK Defence Ministry declared it was, quote, the largest concentration of fighter jets to operate at sea from a Royal Navy carrier since HMS Hermes in 1983. Moreover, the fighters are flown by the renowned 617 Squadron, known as the Dam Busters. The The following spring, the British Ministry of Defence was proud to announce that it had launched the largest concentration of maritime and air power from British shores in an entire generation. Then, in June of 2021, HMS Queen Elizabeth and her mighty fighters rejoined the efforts in the Middle East, the first combat operation for a UK carrier in over a decade. Over the following 6 months, the F-35s conducted around 2,000 takeoffs and landings without any major incidents. That is, until November 17th. At 10 a.m., HMS Queen Elizabeth was conducting routine operations over international waters in the eastern Mediterranean when one of her treasured F-35s crashed into the sea. The Ministry of Defense reported the incident, but added that it would be inappropriate to further comment on the situation, given the ongoing investigation. However, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace did clarify that the jet had come down right after takeoff and added, quote, "We are pleased the pilot is safe and well and back on board." Despite the incident, operational and training flights continued. Days later, a dramatic video was posted on social media. It was captured from a mobile phone filming a computer screen that was playing what is labeled as visual surveillance system. The footage appears to be raw video from the carrier's own closed-circuit TV system, which monitors regular flight deck activities. And evidently, it also helps in accident investigations. The surveillance footage shows the instant the Lightning rolled off the ship, and despite its unconfirmed authenticity, the Ministry of Defense did acknowledge its existence. Previous unconfirmed reports suggested the pilot tried to abort the takeoff, but instead ran out of the deck and nosedived into the waters. The new evidence seemed to support this version. As seen in the video, the F-35 jet approached the ski jump in preparation for takeoff. But somehow, instead of accelerating, the aircraft slowed down on the ramp. Out of power, the fighter toppled into the sea. Not long after the jet disappeared, the video shows the pilot ejecting, and fortunately, a parachute gliding down. The parachute then seems to become snagged on the ship's bow, confirming another rumor circulating before the video was exposed. British company Martin Baker, which manufactured the pilot's ejection seat, was quick to tweet on their official profile, quote, "We've saved 7,662 aircrew lives from around the world to date." The Ministry of Defense reiterated that it was still too soon to comment on the potential causes of the accident and immediately restarted the investigation. It is speculated that a likely cause of the accident could have been an engine cover left on the jet by mistake. The Sun newspaper claimed that the engine failed due to the ingestion of a, quote, "cheap plastic rain cover." However, even though it is possible, the blocker came from elsewhere on the deck. That same report claims that the sailors on deck immediately knew that something was wrong. Subsequently, they spotted a red cover floating in the sea, and the Sun's anonymous sources, quote, "blamed human error and oversight." The fact that there were no other aircraft involved or any hostile actions does point to technical failure or human error. However, a secondary investigation was greenlit to dig into how the sensitive video was released online. Moreover, efforts will be made to recover the costly equipment, which may be virtually intact. The aircraft is packed with highly sensitive technology and data, and the stealth jet is among the most expensive defense projects undertaken by the American military. Ironically, it was designed to be hard to detect on radar. Within hours of the incident, the UK approached the US for assistance in salvaging the aircraft, and the closest equipment was in Spain. According to USNI News, the US Navy became quickly involved in the recovery mission, and so did Italy. The 65,000-ton Royal Navy flagship returned home after the last leg of her attempt to increase the British presence as far as Japan and South Korea. HMS Queen Elizabeth's maiden deployment included exercises with the Indian military in the Indo-Pacific region, and heightened tensions with China added to the sensitivity of having lost such a valuable asset. It is left to wonder what type of top-secret information was lost for the Asian superpower to find. While the November incident was the first time a British F-35 was lost, it wasn't the first time the model had run into trouble. As far back as 2018, the Pentagon was forced to briefly ground its Lightning fleet due to a problem with the fighter's fuel tubes, which was solved back then. That same year, a U.S. Marine Corps F-35B was the first of its kind to crash in an accident in South Carolina. Furthermore, in April of 2019, a Japanese F-35A was involved in an accident over the Pacific Ocean, which sadly claimed its pilot's life. The Japanese Defense Ministry attributed the disaster to spatial disorientation, as the pilot wasn't able to adequately sense his surroundings during a nighttime training session and flew into the waves. In another training routine in May of 2020, a U.S. Air Force F-35A crashed in Florida, but thankfully the pilot ejected on time. Even though incidents cast a shadow on otherwise professional crews, their service shouldn't be overlooked. As Secretary Wallace put it, quote, "The ability to operate from the sea with the most advanced fighter jets ever created is a significant moment in our history, offering reassurance to our allies and demonstrating the UK's formidable air power to our adversaries."